Ben Bryer, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Great to be here. Thanks, Will.
Ben, you bought a 65-year-old manufacturing business, a manufacturer of gages. I didn't know what gages were. You had to explain it to me. We'll have you explain it to the audience here in a little bit. But it's a really neat business and well-earned. Your search was long and expensive, and we're going to hear the whole saga today. Start us off, Ben, please, with some background on you.
Sure. Appreciate the intro. I can't wait to jump into some of the topics there. So I grew up a finance guy, sort of true finance guy. Got my career sort of started at Vanguard, and I sort of grew up at Vanguard. I thought that I would be there for a long time, and I was. I grew up in credit research there, picking bonds for Vanguard's bond funds. So I got exposure to investment grade corporate bonds, and over the course of my time there, I got into structured products, asset-backed securities and commercial mortgage-backed securities. And so I was doing some really cool, funky analysis. Looked at deals that were backed by a fleet of tugboats, for example. So we did some really cool things, and as my career there went on, I sort of got more interested in getting away from a computer. Information is for the public markets, information is getting priced in at an increasingly rapid rate with AI, and the pace of technological advancement is it's price allows people to price in information really quickly. And so I was like, man, if I'm an analyst and I'm a research guy, where can I go to get as far away from a computer as possible? Where can I go where the information is dirty, not accessible, where can I go? And so
and Ben, this means because you're trying to, this is kind of like where can you still find alpha? Where can you still get an edge?
That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, thank you for clarifying. Yes, it's my sort of personal search for alpha, in terms of not only just my financial, situation, but also just my career. Where can I go to have a career of searching for alpha, which is what I love.
And Ben, how did you learn about search itself? Because there's still usually a kind of a discovery moment that this is a thing people do, that there's SBA loans, that there's a way to do this and a path. What was your first exposure?
Yeah, great question. So from Vanguard, I went to a small independent sponsor called Mainline Equity in outside of Philadelphia, where I'm from, and I got exposed to the independent sponsor model, and I liked that. I was working in that, learned a lot, which was helped to sort of help me sort of to develop my own perspective on the market. And at that time, I was also going back to business school at NYU, and one day, a friend of mine said, "Hey, do you know what search funds are?" And I said, "I have no idea, man. Never, I have no clue." And he's like, "Well, it's totally your thing. This is totally you. You should go to Harvard's search fund conference. They have it every year. You should go to it. It's in 2 weeks on a Sunday morning." And so I was like, great. So that just happened to be a weekend when I had class at NYU. Class ended late on a Saturday. Took the train up to Boston. The conference was on a Sunday, and so it's in December in Boston, so it's freezing cold. Sunday morning, trying to find my way around Harvard. Finally, find the auditorium, get in there, and there was probably, that year there were probably 50 or 100 people there, which didn't seem like a lot because the auditorium's pretty big. And I sat in the back and I started to listen to people talk about search and SMB. And I immediately was very intrigued. And I was like,
my friend was right. This is me.
Right. And I was like, oh my God, moved to the front. I moved to the front, took out, my notebook, became laser focused on this. And that was that moment where I was like, wow, if those people can do it, anybody can do it. Like it never really occurred to me that anybody can do this, like literally anybody. You just need certain tools in your toolbox, and you have to have a certain sort of risk appetite, and some, some courage, and that's the formula. And I was like, wow.
And Ben, so on the one hand, you were looking for some differentiator for yourself in your career, some sort of alpha. But I suspect what you were hearing up there on stage that day in Cambridge was not just kind of some financial argument for that. There was a more holistic, something broader was resonating with you. What was it?
Yes. Definitely. So the financial piece, I didn't even that's just a teeny small piece. It was an opportunity to sort of get the keys to the bus, I say, where you have more autonomy in your career and your life, and you have an opportunity to get to the C-suite at a relatively early age. So you take on more responsibility, and you basically sort of have a chance to live and die by your sword, so to speak. And I liked that. I was at a point sort of in my life where I had learned from people throughout my career, and I was like, man, kind of now I'm in business school, I'm learning new ideas, and I'm interacting with my classmates, and I just was like, man, I want to go I want to go swing my bat. I want to go I want to go try this out.
Great. So you walk out of the auditorium onto Harvard Yard that day, feeling inspired, like this is for you. So then what?
And so one day, I'm in business school. I'm in my marketing class, Professor Carr. So one day he brought in a guy named Steve Garrow, and Steve Garrow started to speak about his background and what he does. And it was remote. So this was during COVID, height of COVID. And I'm standing there in my kitchen, watching this guy talk about himself and what he's doing. And I'm like, man, if I could close my eyes and picture myself in 20 years, I'd be that guy. I'd be, that's me. He's talking about, being a college athlete, being an English major, being a finance guy. I was all these, it was all the same, very similar. And so, of course, I raised my hand virtually, and I was like, hey, can I talk to you? I'm Ben, and I'd like to talk to you because what you're saying is really interesting.
And Ben, what was he saying? What does Steve Garrow do?
Yeah. So he was just talking about ETA, but he didn't use that term. But he was talking about buying businesses, running businesses, selling businesses, working with, family and founder-owned businesses. And he has his hands in a lot of different things, but they were all sort of some of it is sort of what, true entrepreneurship, or, entrepreneurship in a traditional sense, 0 to 1. But it was also ETA stuff. And so, he was involved in a lot of different, cool, weird deals, casinos in, Montana, and a gaming company and esports and all these weird things. I'm like, wow, he's totally, he's open to these opportunities, and he talked about learning. And I think this is a big theme in search, in my opinion, and in ETA in general, is just you have to be successful, in my opinion, you have to love learning. This is about learning. The entire process is about learning, about everything. You're during due diligence, you're learning about industries, you're learning about the company, you're learning about yourself. And then when you post-close, you're learning about how to run the business. You're learning from the employees. So you have to love learning. And he sort of talked about that. He's like, I'm a professional learner. And I was like, I love learning. I really love, I love learning. And so he's like, okay, yeah, sure, dude. This million people, say the same shit. Okay, whatever. And so I was like, can we keep in touch? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so we kept in touch, and he started off he had a little project for me at first, something basic, little research project. he's like, hey, can you help me with like XYZ? And I was like, sure, like totally, like, yes, I will. Yes, I can help you with this. And so, I did what he asked, returned the, my analysis to him. He's like, okay, like this is really good. Like, awesome. Like, how about this? Can you help me with this? And so like throughout, over the course of probably a year and a half, about a year and a half, like he and I we were working together on these different projects, random analyses on all sorts of things. And so we had built up this rapport, and it came down to, the end of business school. And I was, about to, graduate and stuff. And at that time I had been, working at Mainline Equity while I was in school. And I was like, hey, like, I kind of want to go do my own thing. Like, I want to pursue ETA like full time. I want to do like a self-funded search where, it gives me a lot of optionality, which that's another big theme. And I was like, I want to know, will you back me if I find a company? Like, will you write the equity check? And he was like, yes. And so I was like, awesome, green light. So that's sort of how we got started, and that's sort of how how I got sort of started in search. It was just just by chance that he came to talk, and it just was by chance that I had a chance to work with him before we actually started searching, which I think is really important.
And did you guys work out any kind of terms at this point? Were you thinking 10, 10, 80 kind of SBA deal, or was it more of just kind of like a directionally find a good business and we'll figure it out?
Yeah, Wild West. No, nothing in writing. Just a handshake deal. Just a handshake deal.
I want to hear about of course, the search and business that you did buy, and you've had a lot go on since you closed on that business. So we just need to be paying attention to time. But I want to give time for you to tell the story of the business you didn't buy, because it was such a long time. So can you give us like a few minutes on the precision metal business?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
This is when we first talked.
Yeah,
you were dealing with that deal.
Yeah.
So let's hear this in brief. It's pretty hard one to condense because it's a really long story.
It is.
But go ahead.
I think that deal was dealing with me. So we looked at a lot of deals, found a precision sheet metal manufacturer in the Northeast, and it seemed to sort of initially check off a lot of the boxes that were hard to check off. Typically, you're not going to check off a lot of the big boxes right away, or at all, right? And then you pass on the deal and you move on. But you started to peel back the layers of the onion here, and I was liking what I was seeing. It was close by, and you seemed to sort of fit this thesis that we started to formulate as the search went on, and so at that point, like you have a really, as like a self-funded searcher, you have a really important choice to make. And I think about this a lot. Like conventional search fund and ETA wisdom tells you, hey, you found a deal, you're doing preliminary due diligence. That's great. The odds of you closing are very small. So you want to keep putting deals in the top of the funnel. You always want deals in your funnel. You want to maintain your pipeline. You want to do, and so that sounds great, right? Like theoretically, yes, that sounds awesome. In practice, that's like for, a self-funded searcher or, without a full research team, like you're not going to be able to do that. And so choice was, okay, go all in, on this deal, or sort of stick my toe in, but try to, and so I was like, all right, like based on my initial research so far, like I'm all in, like I'm closing this deal. Like I'm all in. And so, if I'm all in on something, it means like I'm really all in. And so, what happened over the course of however many years, I guess it was probably about a year, a little over maybe. It was a years long of like due diligence dance that we did.
Why didn't it work out? Why didn't it work out?
Great question. So I think initially, and this is a good lesson, I think, for other people pursuing these sorts of deals. I think there's a couple of not mistakes, but a couple of choices that we made, and I made is my choices that probably which I didn't do. So I think trying to buy a business and the real estate. A lot of times these, baby boomers, they own the business and the real estate. Very common theme. And typically they want to sell both, right? To monetize their assets, to, retire, move on. Trying to buy real estate and a business at the same time is really hard, really hard. Trying to buy real estate in this, that's had manufacturing activities on it for a long time in this particular state that has, very, tight environmental regulations and laws. That's like a full project in and of it's that's just like that's a lot to take on. So I wish that we had focused on like just the business first. Because, buying a business is really hard in and of itself, right? Especially when you're dealing with a seller that super emotional, really hard to work with, had a very, very rigid view of the world and the process. And so, I wish that we had just focused on just the business first and done the real estate second. So we pursued both. And we got into, the environmental stuff. And in this particular state, there are these certain rules where you sort of have to do, a phase one, environmental, site assessment. And depending on what comes up with on the phase one, which is basically just like a book report, you have to do a phase two, which then you start spending money, drilling through concrete and setting up, monitoring wells and so I got caught on an environmental due diligence roller coaster, and racked up fees of north of $100,000 on doing phase one, phase two, phase three. All the while, like there were issues with the business that that's where I should have been spending my time, right? That's and with the seller, my relationship with the seller, which is really important, like that sort of took a backseat to like these big environmental things, since those are, I call those like showstoppers or deal killers. Like it just was too much, and the seller just, momentum's really important in this space, obviously, and people have talked about that here before. It's very true. You got to keep up momentum to get across the finish line, and momentum just stalled out, and the due diligence process just, it took too long, and we just lost momentum. So finally, it just, after racking up $150,000 of dead deal fees, like it just was too expensive. Like, and so.
So did you walk, or did the seller walk?
Yeah, the seller walked, and I'm glad he did. Because I was all in. I'm literally all in. I did not look at another deal during that time. All I cared about was closing this business. It's all I talked about. It's just, I was all in.
And you're glad that the seller walked, because you realize in retrospect it wasn't a great business, and you, honey badger that you are, never would have let go.
I would have never.
So you needed him to let go.
I would have never. It still is a great. I mean, it is. I do think it's a really interesting opportunity. I really do. But I am glad that he walked. I would not have let go as easily. To
crystallize like some of this stuff that you learned, it was, you feel like you got too fixated on things related to the real estate and the environmental tests and so on, which were really expensive, both monetarily, but also in your attention. And so to the neglect of diligencing the business itself, nurturing your relationship with the seller, nurturing your relationship with his deal team. That's one of the main lessons. That's one. Give us one more.
Yeah, the other one, and I would say probably the top one. Your relationship with the seller is super important. So as a searcher, investor, you're looking at the seller, right? And understanding his or her capabilities. How are they involved in the business? Is this someone that is going to work with us through the diligence process? Like you're asking yourself all these questions. You also want to put the same level of scrutiny on the members of the seller's team, the accountant, the lawyer. You want to make sure that they've done deals before in this space. If they're also inexperienced in the SMB space and buying and selling small businesses, you not only will be educating the seller or trying to educate the seller, but you'll also be trying to educate the accountant and the lawyer as to like what the norms are in I call it SMB land. that's very expensive. Every time you're going back and forth, like that's more expensive for the seller. It's more expensive, for us, because a lot of times it's, lawyer to lawyer. And so you want to really pay attention to that. You want to pay attention to who's on the seller's team, and do they understand what is normal. That all affects momentum, right? And cost, because you can't run up. You have to be mindful of the seller's due diligence costs as well. Like if they start racking up a big bill and they don't really see the process going anywhere, they're going to walk, and you're going to be left with dead deal fees, which can kill you. They're deadly.
This whole process was what, 13 months?
About a year and a half.
And was there actually a particular moment that you look back on now that you can identify and say to yourself, that was the moment I should have vacated this process on that deal?
Yeah, when the seller, and I'm a bigger guy, I'm over 6 feet tall, former college football player. This seller happened to be a big guy, bigger than me, taller than me. And when he, when the seller sort of gets in your face and sort of, cusses you out, inches away from your face, just weeks before you're supposed to give that man, a couple $1 million, like that's usually a good indicator. Like something's wrong here. Like that's not like you don't normally treat someone like that. Like maybe should have walked there. But yeah, that's just not.
That's a good one.
It's not normal, right? That's
No.
weird. But yeah, I learned.
Okay. All right, Ben. Well, you're 18 months in. You are 150 grand in. What is life looking like and feeling like now? How what are your emotions like?
Yeah.
Finally having this deal kind of collapse, you being this incredibly persistent person that you are.
Yeah. I'm also lucky when Steve supported me throughout the whole time too. So he believed in me, and like he bet on me. And so, I'm very fortunate that I even had the ability to and so did my parents, and I had saved up some money to fund this. So at that point I had run out of money completely. And so I'm, however old I was, over 30, valedictorian of my class at NYU, with no job, no money, and sitting at home. And I'm like, man, this is pretty bad. This is pretty bad. I should probably turn off the heat because I need to start, saving money. So turn off the heat, wear sweatshirts. I'm like, man, this is pretty brutal. Is this, do I want to continue to pursue this? And if I do, how exactly am I going to do that? And so when that sort of fell through, and I'm like, man, how am I going to pay back this money?
How are you going to pay back money? So you started
the 150 grand, because I ended up borrowing some of it from my parents.
So you had depleted your own savings
completely
and borrowed money.
Yes.
So you're now in debt.
Now I'm levering my personal balance sheet. Yep. Wow. And so I had completely, because it took so long, I completely ran out of savings, because it's not normal for a search to take this long. Completely ran out of savings, was totally all in on this business. And I'm, also very fortunate that I have the parents and family that I do, incredibly fortunate and grateful. But I'm like, man, my parents are retired. They don't have, millions of dollars. So they're they need that money. And so, I'm like, man, I screwed myself. I screwed my parents. This is totally not a good situation. And I was really depressing. I think mental health, and, I know that people have talked about it here, but, just in this space in general, but that's a real thing. It's an emotional roller coaster, and you have to have a really good support team. But I was super depressed. It's an emotional roller coaster. And so I ended up doing a lot of freelance work on Upwork and some of these other freelance sites. There's a big need out there for due diligence consultants, and so I turned on another revenue stream because I still have a mortgage payment to make, and I'm like, shit, I don't have any money. This is not good, but I don't want to go back to corporate America and give up on the search completely. What can I sell? I need to sell something to get I can sell services, of my skills. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I started doing that, and that was like super lucrative, super lucrative. And so I was like, okay, like I think that I can get out of here, like out of this hole. Like, I think I can get out of this hole, it was pretty depressing. I mean, being in your 30s, like, it's hard to date, girls don't want to date a guy who's 30 and doesn't have a job and doesn't have a shit together. Like, you're supposed to have already had all those things together by this point, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so it's like, how do I tell that story? Like, that's a tough pitch, right? Like, nobody's going to.
And you're like, no, I'm buying a business. And they're like,
yeah, man.
What?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Like, show me. Right. Like,
Yep.
until you got the keys to that business. Like, that's the most fanciful notion in the world. Like, who's going to believe that?
Nope. Tough to get girls in that situation. Pretty tough.
Yeah.
Pretty tough. So I was like, okay, like, fuck, I can't date. Like, and so you have to really look at you. This is one of those moments where I'm like, man, I'd go to bed, cry myself to sleep every night, probably for a couple of months there. And, I'm like, man, is this really what did I get myself into? Like, what did I get myself into? And is this something that I really think I can be successful at? Is this something that I really think is a good investment of time, money? Like, is this really what I want to go do? And so I questioned myself a lot, and I was like, okay, like, let's start at the beginning. Like, why did I even get into this in the beginning? Like, let me go back and refresh my analysis. And so I read some of the first chapters in the Harvard Business Review book. And it was about sort of doing that internal assessment. And like every time I went back to, this internal assessment, like, framework, I was like, man, yes, this is me. Yes, this is me. And I just check, and I'm like, all right, I'm doing this. And so, throughout that whole time, when I'm focused on, this particular business, my partner, Steve, was talking about another business that was also in manufacturing. And his friend, his close friend, was actually the advisor, the M&A advisor that the sellers had hired to sell this business. And so, this, our first, due diligence process lasted forever, but I kept hearing about this business. Like, and Steve, would talk about it, and I'm like, okay, Steve, like, that sounds cool. Like, but like, I'm trying to focus on this one right now. Like, I want to close this one. And it just kept coming up. And so finally, after the first deal sort of fell through, Steve brought it up again. He's like, hey, like, my friend's still trying to sell this. Like, it's been a couple years. Like, I think he's having a hard time selling this business. I'm like, well, like, what is it? What do they do again? Like, and Steve was like, well, like, they manufacture something like with metal, and like, I think it's used to like, these pieces are used to like measure things. And I'm like, okay, let's take a look. Like, let me see it. After all these years of hearing this, I'm like, let me see it. And I was like, wow, this is like your first look at this, you're like, wow, like, why are they having trouble selling this? Like, what's wrong? Like, something's wrong here.
What was the business, and what was so clearly attractive about it?
Yeah. So the business was the one that we ended up buying. Meyer Gage company.
Meyer Gage.
Yep. It is just a coincidence.
Named for the founder, Al Meyer.
Yes, named after Al Meyer. Yep, who founded the business, and I can talk to you about that because I think that I call him the Steve Jobs of the fixed limit gauge world. Fixed limit, gauges are. I'm talking about cylindrical pin gauges specifically. 2 inches long cylindrical pieces of steel that are ground down to super tight tolerances, and they're just used to not measure, but they're used to inspect holes that are machined into any and everything, and it's just used for a pass-fail test. That's it. So you're not measuring anything; you're just testing whether a machined hole was machined to spec, pass-fail. That's it. And so it's a super cheap way to maintain super tight, quality standards.
So Ben, I run a factory manufacturing something.
Yep.
During the manufacturing process, holes are punched or drilled into whatever material, let's say steel, and to make sure those holes are the right diameter.
Yep, diameter. Yep.
I take these. I'll have like a box of pins of varying sizes, just like you would have like a screwdrivers of varying,
Correct.
the
Yep.
heads of various sizes.
Yep.
These are your product, and I open it up in there, and I pull out a cylinder of what this hole is supposed to be, and I slide in your cylinder, and if it fits snugly or as it's supposed to, or doesn't fit or whatever, that tells me pass, like you said, pass fail if the hole is correct, or not. And these tolerances can be incredibly precise.
Yep, we're talking
Right?
like millions of an inch.
Millions of an inch.
Millions of microns. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, these and again, we're talking about pin gauges specifically. Pin gauges are just one of many types of fixed limit gauges, which that's a conversation for another day. But we're talking about just good old fashioned plain pin gauges.
Okay.
And that just means there's no threads on them, like a screw. So these are just plain, plain cylindrical pieces of steel. Anytime in manufacturing, when you're machining these holes, and when you are producing these parts, there's a tolerance limit of what's acceptable. It's a range, because it's impossible to produce identical pieces. You're never going to be able to do that. So there's a tolerance limit. And so pin gauges are typically used for what's called no-go gauging. So you take, your lower limit of what's acceptable, you take the appropriate size gauge for that, test that. If that, the go gauge, if that goes through, that's good. You look at the upper limit of what's acceptable, take that, pick the right size pin, test that. Okay, the pin goes through. Okay, that's good. Then you take your no-go pin, and you typically want to size that just so it's just a little bit over the outside limits of what's acceptable. And if that can't go through, then the part is machined to spec, and you're in tolerance, and you're good to go. So it's quick, easy, and relatively cheap compared to other methods of quality control. These are used in quality control efforts throughout the manufacturing process. I mean, typically, they're used in any industry, really, anything that has a hole that's machined into it. So, I mean, that's auto, that's aerospace, that's literally, it's
so anybody listening to this who knows manufacturing would probably have heard of a piece like this, or if they have their hands on the manufacturing line.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And when I started to peel back the layers of the onion, when I started to talk about this with people that had experience in manufacturing, they were like, "Oh yeah, I know Meyer Gage." "Oh yeah," and I'm like, "Wow, that's weird."
Wow.
How do you know that? That's. But I also liked it that you walk up to somebody walking down the street and you say, "Hey, do you know what a pin gauge is?" 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, "I have no idea what that is." Just like I never heard of it in my life, and I liked that. I was like, okay, cool. This is a weird. This is weird. And I loved it.
And so Ben, you like the weirdness of it. You like that it's so nichey. You like that it's seemingly enduringly profitable. Anything else that you liked about it? And when you saw that sim and you were like, wait, why is this having a hard time selling?
The first thing that I sort of think about is industry structure, because that's what determines your success, your financial success, or I should say, that's what determines the financial characteristics of your business is the industry structure. Businesses don't function by themselves; they function within an industry. So if you don't understand the structure of that industry, if that industry isn't attractive for various reasons, it doesn't matter how good the business is. I don't care if it's the best business in the world. If it functions in an unattractive industry, I'm out.
What's the industry structure here, and why is it so attractive?
Yeah. So I started to dig into this more and more, and there was no 800-pound gorilla in the space. So it's an oligopoly. So there's only a handful, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 companies, in the country that make fixed limit gauges at all, and that can include pin gauges, that includes just ring gauges, other types of fixed limit gauging. But there's only a few players in the space, and they all seem to be sort of the same, sort of these family founder-owned businesses, been around for a long time. And I learned that it was sort of very incestuous. biggest competitors were also our customers, and they were also our suppliers, and we all sort of work together and know each other. And I'm like, wow, like that's really cool. Like that's like, that you pick up your economics textbook and you read the characteristics of an oligopoly. Like this checks off all these boxes, and like that's attractive, right? Like you're not competing on price in an oligopoly. Like that's really cool. Like I wanted to find a business where it doesn't compete on price, because you get into that situation, that's just
race
not
to the bottom.
It's not attractive. And so Meyer Gage is currently the only company in the world that we know of, that I can find, that produces Class Z and Class X full pin gauge sets. There's there are other companies in the world that do produce pin gauge sets of Class Double Z, for example, but we are the only company in the world that does full pin gauge sets at Class Z and Class X, which is really cool. And that I liked that. It gives us that margin of safety where if we make a mistake and we've made a lot, like things don't go our way for various reasons, like it doesn't sink our ship. It doesn't sink, and that's really, really important. But so that's sort of the space.
Great. Give us a sense of the size of the business in terms of dollars and headcount.
Yep. So in terms of revenue, you're looking at north of 3.5 to 3.5 million to 4 million. You're in that range. Every year, in that range. Headcount, I guess we have 17 total employees. A few probably 2 or 3 are part-time. And the rest are full-time. And you're looking at adjusted EBITDA margins of, you're in the mid-20s there, consistently. And, year after year, you see this sort of the same financial results. And that's one of the things that you look for, is you look for stability, right? When you're going to put leverage on the business, your levering cash flow is one of the key things, right? Is, you want it to be stable, right? You're not looking for something that's cyclical or seasonal. Ideally you want it to be, nice and steady.
Yep.
And that's another thing that we found with this business. It was man, that's really cool. And, you talk about, churn, right? Customer attrition, whatever, there's none.
But are they recurring contracts? Because I imagine that the set of gauges is something you just buy sporadically.
Yeah, great question. There are no contracts. We don't have any contracts. It is the same. I'm talking about the top, probably the top 25 customers. They've been the top 25 customers for decades. People,
wow.
We have 2 people in the office specifically. I won't name their names, but one has been here for 19 years. One has been there for 20 years. They've seen these customers. They've seen the ownership change hands. At our various customers. They knew the current owner's father, and now they so now they know that that person's son or daughters now running the business.
Okay, so let's get into the weeds of the deal itself a little bit.
Cool.
and return to your relationship with Steve. Steve's been supporting you, believes in you this whole time. Tell us about how you're going to structure this deal. You're not a traditional searcher. You're self-funded.
Yep.
So are you going to go after this with kind of a 10-10-80 style or 20-80 SBA loan? What are you envisioning, and what happens?
What we went with was a conventional loan. So I had, during the search process, I had developed a relationship with just a few really good, commercial lenders. Each has their own sort of underwriting box, right, or lending appetite. This deal just happened to be a really good fit for this person's, underwriting box. His name's Adam Regnery, First Bank of New Jersey. They are, first at that, when we closed a couple months ago, the banking space has definitely changed since then with, a lot of bank failures since then. But at that time, they had, an appetite to grow in sort of the SMB and ETA space. And so he, he also trusted me, which is something I'm very grateful for. And so we structured out a conventional loan that was sort of atypical for them. Which again, I appreciate the freedom and flexibility, but I won't go into the specifics, but just in, things that we looked at were like the amortization structure versus the term of the loan, timing of payments, quarterly versus monthly, and these were all different levers that I love this stuff, right?
And Ben, why didn't you go SBA?
Yeah, I didn't go SBA because I didn't like it's sort of a cookie cutter type of structure. At least I found the 7A loan specifically I'm talking about. The 504 program, I don't know a ton about, so I won't even talk about that here. But 7A loan specifically, 10-year term, like obviously that's normal than a conventional term loan, right? So that that part was interesting, but I didn't like the different like personal guarantee stuff with that, and depending on the bank, the seller, we wanted to use the seller note and did use the seller note. Like the seller may have to take a back seat, like on like their principal and interest payments. Again, depends on the bank. But like no seller's going to go for seller financing if like their cash flows don't start until year 5. Like it's just not that's a tough sell, right? So I was like, I don't even want to get into all that. Like I want to work with someone like who I have a personal relationship with, who has like freedom to structure the debt package based on what we need now, but also has the freedom to like structure it, change it going forward without having to like do a complete refi.
And that sounds good for sure, but there's got to be a catch. Why don't more people that I talk to use conventional financing? I think the answer is probably that they can't. Like the SBA loan makes deals like this attractive to banks in a way that maybe they wouldn't otherwise be.
There's that piece. I mean, this is sort of a conceptual thing. I mean, I think it comes down to like something that has nothing to do with the debt at all. It has to do with the equity, your equity check. I think people sort of, what's attractive about the SBA program, at least in my opinion, in this space is like, you can, I won't say that this is normal, which is, it's not, but like, it's as advertised, you can get up to like 90% like LTV on the,
Yep.
And so it's like, wow, I only have to come up with 10%. And if, the seller note can, now I only need 5% in some situations. Like that's attractive, right? Like that's the goal with like, these are all leverage buyouts, right? So like the goal is put as little equity in as you can and lever up the cash flows as much as you can and, try to survive like that. That's how you maximize your IRR. But so I think it's the equity contribution and those requirements, and obviously that the required equity check, like size of that is dictated by like the credit cycle and different lending appetites and stuff. So I think that's a big reason why people go that route.
And kind of based on your relationship with Steve, you felt like you were going to be able to put more equity into this deal. I mean, or I should say Steve, your investor, whatever. Yeah. However, your access to capital was maybe a little bit fuller than somebody who's doing the SBA loan.
Yeah, I wasn't, and this is what I'm super grateful for. Is like it wasn't just the Ben and Bryer show. It wasn't me doing it by myself. It was like Ben and Steve, and so. Steve gave me a ton of freedom to go run, go find a business, go anything, and he and I were very much on the same page with what we were looking for. Obviously, I'm not going to put us in a shitty situation, but I believe that based on my experience, like if you can find an attractive deal, and by deal I mean attractive business, attractive valuation, attractive situation from an operational perspective and a human capital perspective, like. You can find something that is attractive. Money, is not a problem.
Right.
And so Steve, was responsible for, I guess I'll call it all the junior capital. We ended up going with like a sort of a mezz type of junior capital piece. But we did, a term loan, I should say. I should back up for a second. We did a term loan, we did a seller note, and then we did a mezz piece as sort of our junior capital. And
Ben, for the uninitiated, what is mezzanine debt?
There's not really one definition of it other than to say it's junior debt. It's subordinate to your senior debt, your bank debt, your term loan, if you have that, or a revolver, you have that. So it's typically your junior capital piece. Has some equity participation. So, in exchange for being subordinated, like investors are probably going to want some upside, right? So there's a conversion piece, or which can come in many different forms: warrants, conversion rights, whatever. But yeah, so I would just say, if I had to define it, I would say it's a subordinated piece of capital that's kind of like debt, but also has upside. So,
and why does it make its way into some deals and not others? Is it kind of like when there's kind of a gap that needs to be filled? Because it's always like a smaller piece of the overall deal.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, it can be sometimes. I guess mezz can be used as a bridge or bridge financing. To sort of fill in a gap that needs to be filled in the cap structure.
Because conventional loans are so underused in self-funded search, where the SBA 7A loan rules. Is there any other information that you want to leave the audience with about that? I mean, would you say everybody should look at conventional loans and they don't do it enough, or what any other takeaways, or have we hit it all?
Yeah, no, I mean, if I had to just say it succinctly, I mean, you want to consider all of your options, and again, like, will never get something that you don't ask for. So, I think with conventional loans, like, you can be creative, and so, but you're only going to be as creative as your banker allows you. So, having that relationship with your lending partner is really, really important. And so, I mean, I think it definitely takes more work, and you definitely have to sort of love, capital structure and, debt modeling and all that stuff. Like, the better you are at that, the more familiar you are with that, the easier those conversations can become. But, I mean, I think, just from, just IRR math, from an IRR math perspective, I mean, the 7A loan can make sense if you're really trying to, minimize your equity check. So, I mean, there's, a lot of ways to skin the cat there, but I definitely think it's people should not just default to thinking SBA 7A loan.
Great.
You want to explore, because it can be, depending on the credit environment, can be flexible. You can get creative.
Ben, the $150,000 in expenses that you'd accumulated, mostly attributable to your broken deal from the precision metal fabrication business. What of those $150,000?
I can say that those dead deal fees, like we were able to sort of roll into our deal with Meyer Gage, which happened probably about a little over a year later. And so we were able to, I was able to, pay back my parents and, make some of the people whole that I had money to, based on our agreement that I had with Steve and our lending partners and stuff, based on the cash flows of Meyer Gage. Those were costs that were incurred as part of our search. And we did use a lot of lessons learned during that process to make our due diligence process with Meyer Gage much more efficient. And so that was just all part of, like, sort of our search.
So, right. So everybody is going to come to the closing table when they do find a business with some accumulated expenses related to their search.
Yeah.
And that's often just kind of rolled into the transaction.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of take
and
that
that
money
should be
back
part
out.
of your LBO analysis, right? Like, that's one of the main inputs is, like, your transaction expenses. Like, what are you, what's normal?
But so in your case, yours wasn't really probably any different than most people listening, other than probably being bigger. I mean, probably most people don't get up to 150, but they're going to have some number between 0 and 100,000 probably. And so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, typically, depends on who you talk to, but I mean, typically it's somewhere between, like, 3 and 5% of enterprise value. So
for transaction costs.
yeah, you're probably in talking legal and accounting typically, but you're probably somewhere in there if it's just legal and accounting. You layer in environmental, can be a whole different ball game. But yeah, from a transaction,
but that's transaction costs.
Yep.
A lot of people in this world are going to also have had a broken deal or two, which will have accumulated other expenses that go to nothing, basically.
Yep, and a way, I mean, and you can...
Like your 150.
Right. And it's all sort of how you treat that with like your investors, right? It's really a function of how long your sort of horizon is. I won't say investment horizon, but maybe it is investment horizon because you are investing time and money. Like, what's your search horizon? Like, is it like, is it 18 months or, after that we're out? Or is it like, hey man, like I'm backing you up for the long term, like whatever it takes. And so that just is, you got to have a good team. And I really recommend focusing on your team first and getting people to sort of buy into what you're looking to do over the long term. Because this can be a marathon. It can be. It's
interesting, Ben, because you're kind of on paper a self-funded searcher, but because you did self-fund your search, but then you ran out of money, and Steve helped you continue to search, help continue to finance your search, and you borrowed money from your personal friends and family.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, he's also your investor. So in some ways, that starts to move a little bit in the direction of like a traditional search fund where you've established relationships with investors who fund your search.
Right.
So and I'm not trying to be too strict on labels here, but it's interesting as it. Yeah, exactly.
It's a combination. I mean, and the other thing is like during this time, I also I discovered freelancing, which I love and I think is really cool, and I think more people should think about that. So I started with Upwork and moved on to a couple different other platforms, but like freelancing was definitely a big source of income and sort of helped me get through that time. And so if there are other self-funded searchers out there, like there are other people who are searching for businesses and some of them go to Upwork for help. It's a really interesting way to connect with people. And who knows, maybe people you meet on Upwork can be, your advisors or your investors. Like there's a lot of people on Upwork, for example. That's just one of many, but like that's something to think about. Yeah.
One of the things that we had talked about in our pre-call, Ben, it was the IT, the tech debt, as they would say in Silicon Valley, that you encountered when you got there. And you thought that this was something that doesn't get enough attention, like IT due diligence. And I'll just jumping ahead a little bit, like I was struck that you said that because one of the kind of patterns that you hear talked about in our world is that we expect the tech stack of the business that we're acquiring to be retrograde. and that's one of the opportunities is to bring tech where there isn't tech or to upgrade the tech. But your take is a little bit different. Your take is that it's really this liability that you should kind of know about and model in your LBO model, I guess, in advance. So elaborate, please.
I mean, like just ETA diligence. I mean, your goal, like one of your main task really is, I guess you have two, is to maintain your relationship with the seller and to close, right? And so typically, again, I hate making big, broad sweeping statements, but typically with some of the baby boomers who own some of the businesses that we were looking at, for example, like they're not the most technically savvy people of all time. Like they didn't need that to have success in the business world. There was no they didn't need to have those skills. And so when you're doing diligence, the understanding of what tech debt really is and how big that liability really is something that probably doesn't get enough attention, most likely because if you bring it up with the seller, again, you have to think about when you bring it up in the diligence process, but most likely, I mean, again, this is just my experience, typically they're not going to really want to talk about IT that much, right? Like if you're in your 30s, like you have a very different level of comfort and sophistication than someone in their 60s when it comes to IT and systems. And so they're probably not going to want to talk about that very much because it's something they're typically not super familiar with, or they don't care about because they don't need to care about that. And So it's a fine line. You get to balance that, but like the business or businesses run on that stuff. Like businesses run on an ERP system, for example, and so it's hard to, because you want to again maintain relationship with the seller. You don't want to piss them off. You don't want to annoy them. It's hard to. It's an area of diligence that is, I think, really, really important and should probably be talked about sort of sooner in the process than later. When it comes to sort of staging your diligence process, it's if the company uses an ERP system, for example, like you really want to dig into that and understand, like, okay, like does this meet our needs? Because like the seller's needs most likely are going to be very different from what your needs are, from an IT perspective and also from a financial reporting perspective, which your financial reporting capabilities are going to be a function of your IT systems. So like you have to think like, okay, this business worked really well for the sellers. Like, this setup, will this work for us? And if not, what's the plan for addressing that? Like, is this something that we can address before we close? Is this something that we should address post-close? And if so, how long will that take? Candidly, I underestimated this, how important this is. I wish I had spent more time in diligence on our accounting system, which is, our ERP system. I wish I spent more time understanding that because, and sort of thinking through that, because when you close, like from a financial reporting perspective, like you're on the clock right now. Like you are owning it and running a business. You are producing financial results that you're going to have to show to lenders and investors. Like, are you prepared to actually collect the information you need to produce those reports? Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely something you want to think through before closing, because more and more as we go forward here, like I believe that every business is going to be a tech business, right? Like IT is going to just become more and more important. It's going to be, play a bigger role in any business. So it's something to really, really think about and understand, like, what changes need to be made, if any, to the tech stack, and when does it make sense to do that? How does it make sense, to talk? How do you talk about that with the seller, if at all, and when? So it's something that should definitely be a super high priority.
One of the features of your deal, Ben, is that you were going to you brought in a CEO as you bought the business, and your actual official title, even though you're kind of the principal here, was going to be CFO. How has that gone?
Steve and I started to focus on manufacturing, and obviously I've never worked a day in manufacturing in my life. Like I literally can't even turn the lights on in here. Like I have no experience in manufacturing, zero. And so Steve has some, but it would be really nice. We both thought to have someone that, I can learn from, someone who has more experience with this, like someone who could help me get up the learning curve, someone who could, run the operations while I sort of worked on the finance stuff. And so we found a guy, came in, part of the management team, and just post close, we just realized it just wasn't a great fit for a few reasons. So now, currently, I've taken on some of the typical CEO responsibilities, and it's been interesting. It's been an interesting time. I have learned that time allocation is critically important. And when you're in SMB as a leader of a firm, you only have so much capacity and bandwidth, and so being able to delegate is super important. Being able to have the people who you trust to be able to delegate to is really important. But it's definitely been pretty rocky. Definitely been pretty rocky as I'm sort of learning and getting up the learning curve. But again, because things that you don't expect will definitely happen. It makes it really important that you understand the resources that you have. So IT obviously is one, but the more important one, and this is a great place to even talk about this, is the employees. Steve and I got so lucky with the employees that we have in this building. And I will get choked up if I talk about it too much, but we do have we have a lady who's worked here for 33 years, a person who's worked here for 28 years, probably 3 or 4 people that have worked here for 20 years. And so just the resources that we have in the support system that like I have here in them is like invaluable. And we've like bonded, together as we sort of gone through these different experiences, and it's been a really fun ride. But I would say like it's also important to understand, like if you're thinking about buying a business, you have to think through like who's going to be on my team. Like, and so if you can, not every business owner allows this, but if you can, spending some time in the business before the deal closes is just so important. And we're lucky, Jamie and John, who we bought the business from, they're Al Meyer's sons. Like Jamie and John at that point had been, had sort of danced the dance with a couple different potential buyers. And they just, candidly, they were just sort of tired of the whole process, and which I can appreciate and I get. And they were just great, gracious enough to allow us to sort of spend time in the business pre-close. And so we got to really understand who we had on our team. And I think that was really important, and that sort of has helped us, at least has helped me, navigate some of these sort of unexpected twists and turns in the road, because we have built rapport and we trust each other, and it's just super important.
Ben, what about if you brought in, you like had the management team, was you, Steve, and this third person who is going to be the kind of the head of operations, the CEO of this small business, and then that doesn't work out and you're left as the sole person? I mean, doesn't that double your work? Now you are the leader of a manufacturing business, and you're very, very, very new to manufacturing. Are you trying to refill this now empty position, or are you just going to carry on as the now sole leader on the management team?
What has happened here in the first few months is a lot of the people who have worked here for a long time, they have stepped up, and they have grown into more management type positions. They've taken on more responsibility. They've helped advise me on different situations, and so we have 3 or 4 people in this company specifically who have like really stepped up and just taken on a lot more responsibility and have helped me sort of go through this process. And I mean, it sucks, but like when any time with any group of people, if you face adversity or some major unexpected changes, like you're going to find out who's on your team real quick, and you're going to find out like who can play ball and like who can't, right? But it takes that adversity to be able to find that, to see the people's true colors and to understand like the true makeup of like your team. Like like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? Like, so when you get punched in the mouth, like you got to see, how are we going to respond? How are people going to react? It's been really cool to see how people have responded to everything. I mean, people at this company really care about this company. They're totally invested, and like I'm just so grateful to be a part of like that team.
So it doesn't sound like you're racing to fill the.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, like as we grow and change, and we go forward, like obviously, like in constant change, right? And so like our HR needs will change and grow as we change, and as our sort of needs change, because I mean, people here have worked here for a long time, right? And so eventually, people are gonna retire, and we're gonna have new people, and our needs will change. But I mean, right now, I love our team, man. We're good.
Great. So you are a searcher and now owner with investors, operator of the business. And what you were really inspired by was Steve Garrow, going back to when you're in class remotely via Zoom, and he's speaking to the class, and it just really resonates what his career is with you. How do you like what you're doing now as an operator, very, very in the business, versus what my impression is that Steve does, which is more, he's, like you said, he's got his hands in a lot of different things, and I assume not an operator in any one thing, more of an independent sponsor. I think you've characterized him to me before as. So how do you kind of compare and contrast the models of entrepreneurship that the two of you have chosen?
Yeah, it's Steve has, and I should say, I mean, he has owned and not. He has been in the operator seat before. So he's just a helpful resource from that perspective as well. But obviously it's very different. I mean, like, yes, I used to be like, a guy, the finance guy, right? Take your feet up on the desk, whip around Excel stuff, go home. But like, and you're like, man, like this business, isn't doing well, or this business is doing really well. Like, I mean, being the guy that's actually pulling those levers on the ground is very different, which is the nature of your question. I love it. It's definitely been something I've grown into and have gotten better at over time. This is, I mean, it's a learning experience, right? You got to love learning. But it's been totally liberating for me to be able to make decisions, have autonomy in like my life and my career, and to really just have the buy-in from people, everybody, investors, Steve, employees. Like, it's been awesome. But you're still learning. At the end of the day, like, that's what this is all about. You're learning about the people you have on your team. You're learning about different business opportunities. You're learning about the industry. I'm learning manufacturing. You have to love that. So, I mean, I would say it's very different in terms of like your responsibilities and the impact of some of the decisions that you make. But I think that if you really have an appreciation and love for just like the learning process, right? Like I love the process, man. Like, I love the deal process. I love the operating process. If you just love that and you love learning about it, like, making that transition is not, it's going to be a lot easier. It won't be as daunting.
What about the going all the way back to where you were in finance, but thinking to yourself that any alpha was going to be kind of technologied away, and so you wanted to get away from the computer screen and kind of learn about the businesses, the opportunities in lower middle market business sales and operations, which is where we all are now. Do you feel like that thesis or hunch that you had that there was alpha hiding out in this space has borne out?
I do. I mean, obviously, like, we haven't had a big exit or whatever, and the question of like when and how you exit, or if you exit at all, it's a completely separate topic. But
and sorry, Ben, when did you close? I don't think I got that from
sorry,
you.
Apologize. February of 2023.
Okay, so we're 6 months in, 7 months in.
Yep, 7 months in. Time flies. Yeah. I would say yes.
Continue, please.
I mean, I would say yes. I mean, alpha, sort of in air quotes, is a function of information flow and how information flows in a market. What I like about this space is that, like, there is no standard, there's no SEC reporting, right? There is no regulatory body that's governing, reporting, other than tax returns, which is a little bit different. But in this space, like, you're only going to get the information that you ask for. So if you don't know questions to ask, then you don't know the questions to ask. And also, like, just because you ask a question and request a piece of information doesn't mean that the seller wants to give it to you. Like, the seller doesn't have to give you anything. So it's that dynamic I love, because you have to build rapport with the sellers. They have to trust you. You have to trust them, and then they have to be willing to give you the information that you ask for. So it's just it's an art. Like, due diligence is an art, and just obtaining that information is fun. And I think that because it's so nuanced, I hope that like there is, that alpha in this part of, I'll say, the broader market, right? And I don't see that really going away anytime soon. So I'm happy in this part of the market.
Ben, anything that I didn't ask you or that you wanted to make sure that you had a chance to share with the audience?
We did cover a lot. No, I mean, the only thing that I would say, because I've talked to a lot of people that, are thinking about doing this and, are all across the, their interest is sort of spans the whole sort of spectrum. But I will say, I mean, I'm just a normal guy. Like anybody can do this. I really believe that you really can do anything you set your mind to. And if you really set your mind to S&P and ETA and like growing and acquiring and growing a small business, like I believe that anybody can do it. It's just a function of, how well you build your team, how well you tell your story. But like, I guess the message I want to send is like, you don't have to go to a super fancy business school. Like anybody can do this. It's just a function of networking and learning. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to be a superhero here. Like you totally do not. It's an interesting opportunity for people that have that, right risk tolerance and willingness to go learn and try it out.
Ben Bryer, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, people can reach out to me via email is probably the best.
Okay.
It's just my first initial, B as in boy, and then my last name, B as in boy, RYER. I would say at Highspire Holdings.
Highspire Holdings.
Yep, and you can just go to highspireholdings.com, and you can contact me through the website there as well. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably the best way to get in contact with me.
Awesome, Ben. Well, thank you very much for giving me so much time and sharing the arduous ups and downs of a very long search. But Meyer Gage seems like a really neat manufacturing business. So, like I said at the top, you've earned where you now are. So, congratulations.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome. Hopefully, people can learn from some of the mistakes I made, and hopefully, it gives people some motivation and inspiration to go hop into ETA.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.